Good afternoon and welcome back to TADHack Global 2017 here in QUT in Brisbane, sponsored by Queensland QUT Foundry as well as Oracle. So this is something a little bit different. We're actually broadcasting live from here, but also connecting through Zoom into Germany. 6 o'clock, isn't it, over there? Professor Rafael Gomez, how are you?
Well, thank you, Jason. It is 6 a.m., but I'm bright and awake. So.
Fantastic. I'm glad that you can actually join us, even though you're over there with a visit over BMW. So appreciate your time and effort for joining us this morning.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So just a couple of things, as I've been asking all the speakers and that we've had on the couch. So what is your area of research and what part of QUT are you from?
So my background is industrial design. I'm at the moment subject area coordinator of industrial design, and in terms of teaching, I look after second year design studio. Within that, I'm also the co-leader for the Design Fabrication platform within the Design Lab at QUT. And so my area of expertise within my research has been design and emotion. So the way that people engage with products, services, and systems from an emotional perspective, and the types of issues that people value and really care about when it comes to engaging with those types of things from an emotional experience perspective.
So we actually met at a QUT Foundry event a few weeks ago where you spoke up there and talked about the emotional design framework and a couple of the aspects there. Can you just broaden in terms of what that means and how does that differ from user experience? So that's a UX design, that's something that people typically understand.
Yes, user experience is very close and very similar to the type of research that I'm looking at. Although I'll kind of expand on the topic itself. Really, what within industrial design, within understanding of the way that people engage with products and services especially, is up until a lot of this research had come about, there was a real focus and a real kind of zooming in on the way that trying to basically make products less, trying to reduce, say, for instance, the error rates that people would have with products. So this user-centered or user-friendly approach, which was good and important, but really experience design moves beyond that. So it takes that into account, and it understands that, people, yes, we want to have less errors and less problems with products. But there's also this other in the real world, there's this other element about the way we value products. So what do we care about products? And often that doesn't always necessarily mean just reducing the error rates, for instance. People fall in love with products for many, many, many different reasons. And often it has less to do with the usability of the product and more to do with just other aspects of the user experience in relation to the way that they engage with products in the real world. So the products really is only a means, it's only a mediator for more important things that people want to achieve in the world, basically.
So one of the comments that we had before you went over Germany, I was talking about my daughter at school, where the whole school was actually buying iPads for them to use. Unfortunately, fortunately in my family, we've got Samsung, we've got Android devices, and she found that experience of using that very difficult, and almost to the point that she was held back because of that experience and the emotional aspects around that.
Yes. I remember our discussion. One of the issues there is around how we actually begin to engage with interfaces and have an interaction with a product is based a lot on previous experience. So there's research that's going on at QUT around what's called intuitive experience or intuitive design. And essentially what that says is that we start forming mental models about the world and about the way that we engage with devices and services in the world. And therefore that starts to shape the way that we approach new products. And so your daughter, I think she was used to a particular type of, an Apple iPad interface. And even though she was dealing with another kind of device that's very similar, the interface itself prohibited her from using it because she had a certain idea or a certain mental model about the way she would engage with that device. And when that's broken, then we have to relearn kind of that model in our head, or improve it, so to speak, so that we have now new mental models about the way we interact with new devices or new interfaces.
So part of the emotional design that I got from your talk was very much also looking at not just the product when I want to buy it or when it's brand new, but what is the emotional connection over a longer period of time. And you talked about this sense of, like a better term, vintage of that product and the emotional journey that you go through, not just at that point in time.
Yes, so to expand on the kind of definition of emotional design, it looks at design and emotion. It's about moving past usability and functionality, and about understanding that human relationship that we engage with products before, during, and after user product interaction, like you say. And so there's a lot of, once you start to kind of contextualize it within that before, during, and after user product interaction, we've got to start thinking about things longitudinally, not just about a specific experience that people might have in a really short period of time, but more of a long period of time of what happens to the way that we engage with products 1 week after we buy it, 3 months after we buy it, 6 months after we buy it. And then, so how does that change over time? And also, how do we engage, how do we relate to products in the very long term? So you're talking about things like nostalgia, emotional connection, memory we have with products. So, I may not want to get rid of a product because it was given to me by someone that I care about, a family member, a partner, whatever it may be. And, we may hold those products for all of our lives for no functional reason, no kind of, they don't give anything back. It's just we have these emotional connections to products. So that's very, very long-term kind of connections that we can build with products, as well as some immediate connections and some, like over the use of the product as well. And there's all sorts of things that impact that as the products wear on.
And I think some of the papers I was reading up around what you're doing was actually also testing the different emotional states or the circumstances that someone experiences with that product. So, as an example, me being rational at this point in time, sitting on the stage, is different from if I was in a highly stressful situation around lots of noise or lots of things happening. Then that in itself actually changes your view of that design.
Yes, that's right. When we're talking about experiences in the real world, we have to deal with context, right? So context becomes a really important thing, actually, probably one of the most crucial things about the ways that we engage with not just products, but people around us. And then the products becomes, a mediator, a bridge for that to either make the communication effective or inhibit the communication. So for instance, right now, the Zoom meeting service for us is allowing us to engage in an effective way. But if that were to stop, obviously that prohibits that interaction. And so context in terms of the way that we engage with products has a real significant impact on the way that we perceive those products. I can talk very briefly about the master's study that I did, where that came out as a crucial element. So that I looked at the way that people, for my master's, the way people engage with automotive interfaces in different traffic situations. And for instance, in a low traffic situation, when there was no people around, no other cars, there was clear road ahead, and it was very clear all around, people would engage with the interface without a problem. They would not concern themselves. They would, interact with the radio, interact with the gear sticks, with the shifters, all the aspects of the car without a problem. But as soon as they entered a real high traffic situation, that's when things were totally different. So people were still engaging in the same activities, but all they wanted to focus on was on, outside of the road, the safety and concerns of other cars and people and so on and so forth. So the same interface just totally changed, and their perception and their experience of that totally changed depending on the context.
So on the other thing that we were talking about as part of leading into this session today was the first challenge that we actually set up for TADHack, and specifically around the emotional engagement that people have in person. So this organisation uses volunteers to actually go around helping communicate families and children, and specifically in whilst they have medical treatment. So part of that TADHack challenge was what would happen to enable that same emotional experience to happen over a video medium or some remote distance, and whether they would still have that same engagement, that same emotional connection with across that technology.
That's fantastic. That's a real interesting challenge, because I think that's an area that's really, I think, still a lot of development to go in terms of being able to engage across distance in a real effective, humane, realistic kind of way. And in fact, I've got a PhD student at the moment looking at that particular kind of hurdle or that challenge, in terms of we're setting up an experiment where we're looking at two people engage face-to-face and trying to code and understand the way and the behaviors and the things that we do face-to-face, which is really unique. So I don't know if you can see me at the moment in the video, but half of my no, that's right. And I can see your body language that it's really difficult, because we observe facial expression, we observe our body reaction to understand what we're saying, the meaning behind what we're saying. You can get that from my voice, you can get that from my intonation, but 80% of communication is actually what we do physically next to each other. And so how can telecommunication devices or devices that are going to allow us to communicate through distance, how can they kind of capture that? Because even video itself is limiting in terms of being able to capture some of those elements. It helps, but it's still limiting. So we're looking at that challenge at the moment with a PhD student, and it is really interesting, and it obviously serves purposes around health, around telecommunications, around business, a whole education, lots of different areas.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. There was another event down River Sea Labs a couple of months ago as part of the Mobile Monday down there, and we actually had a speaker that was quite involved in alternate reality, virtual reality, and they had a bit of a speaking session around that. It was really interesting from that side in terms of the engagement and what people can do in a very digital space to create a connection, not just between people. We were talking even just books that people had, and the AR sitting on top of that, and things popping out, and dragons flying, and graphics flying all over the place. And what if you did that on a bigger scale? It created this new opportunity in terms of that connection, not just in art, but the emotional sense.
And that is one of the things that I'm challenging my student to look at, is once we introduce technology into the context of communicating across distance, you actually open up a whole other possibilities, not just human-to-human communication, because that can be limiting itself. For instance, if I'm chatting to someone on Messenger, Facebook Messenger, I can send them a link, I can send them a GIF, I can send them something that connects them into the internet that can enhance that communication that we're having. Whereas I can't do that without that device, or without some sort of computer in front of me. If I'm with you, next to you, there's a lot that I can do because you can see my body, and we can have a chat and laugh and do all these other things. But the telecommunications or the technology can actually enhance or provide all sorts of new ways of engaging, and that's the beauty of it as well. Is there's new forms of communications that will evolve as a result.
So I think you sort of talked about some of those futures, that kind of thing. The other aspect that you have talked about in some of your research areas is the wearable technologies. So we talked to Cara Burns just before around patient-generated health data, and just simplifying the whole experience about capturing that. And you've been doing some stuff in that space. Can you share a few words around what you're doing there?
Sure. It's still early days with that, but it's really interesting. One of the papers that I wrote maybe 3 years ago really set the scene for the research, the ongoing research that I'm doing, that I'm really interested in at the core of my area of expertise, is around health and the way that people experience devices. It used to be, previously in, say, only 5 years ago, the cutting edge kind of work was around what was called portable devices, so devices that we carried around with us. Nowadays, the cutting edge kind of stuff is around wearables, so stuff that can wear on our clothing, that can wear on our skin, that we can wear with us, and it's very close to the term portable. But I think the future of technology and health will be really, and it's going to come much quicker than we think, is implantables. So that's where we will have technology embedded within us to do and to engage and to experience in different ways. And I think that will, like I said, will come around much quicker than we think. And it's about the challenges that presents in terms of how we experience, not just, they're not really devices anymore, but how do we experience our health as a result? How do we experience the way that we engage with technology, the way that we think about being healthy when we have implantables and when we have wearables all around us that we engage with in ways that we don't even recognize or that we even understand as at the moment. So once that technology comes ahead, it's going to be really interesting in terms of the way that changes our perception of experience, our emotional experience towards these things, and our emotional experience towards our own health.
So it sounds there's a lot of interesting stuff that's coming in, not just from a telecommunications standpoint, but just the way that we deal with technology experience that at that point in time, plus also the connection that we make over a longer period of time. So Rafael, that's pretty much all the time that we've got this afternoon. Appreciate you getting up so early in Germany and getting up on Zoom. So it would have been good to actually having you sitting right here, but I know that you've got other commitments, so I appreciate your time this afternoon and this morning. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Jason. Appreciate it.
Up and